With Episode 2, Act 2, Bungie has buffed roaming supers so much so that they are now meta for even endgame activities like grandmaster nightfalls. Guardians will now receive roughly 3 times the super energy from damaging PvE combatants when using a roaming super, so that means you'll get your roaming super way more often. And then not only that, but roaming supers have had their damage buffed against champions by 30 to 55%, making them comparable to even one-off supers. So today I'm bringing you an Arc Hunter build that has benefited from all these changes to roaming supers. Not only that, but the main exotic this build uses has also received a massive buff, meaning you can double dip on these damage increases. And then on top, Arc builds are actually very powerful in Episode 2 because there are so many artifact perks that synergize with it, meaning you will not miss Prismatic one bit. Dim link for the build will be in the comments below, so let's get into it. The main exotic at the heart of this build is Raiden Flux, the Hunter exotic chess piece. Its exotic perk provides stacks of the buff Synapse Junctions, which increases the damage of our Arc Staff super and decreases the rate at which our super drains. Pre-buff it gave nearly a 50% damage increase at 3 stacks, but now this has been buffed to a 70% damage increase, which is pretty huge. The Raiden Flux damage increase stacks multiplicatively with the damage buff against champions, and then this season by using a grenade launcher to prime our enemies, we can also get another 15% weaken debuff. We can actually take this even further with the new artifact perk Arc Compounding, whereby Arc sources deal increased damage to blinded enemies. This is a further damage increase on top, so with all these damage bonuses, we've nearly tripled our damage against champions with Arc Staff, which is kind of nuts. With all these damage buffs, this super slices through champions like butter. So the combo becomes very simple. Have you or your teammate prime the champion with a grenade launcher for a 15% weaken debuff and stun them. Whilst in your super, use the combo light attack, and then heavy attack, and this will then use the palm strike attack from Arc Staff to do massive damage to champions. Let's go over our aspects. So our first aspect, Lethal Current, after dodging gives our melee attack the ability to jolt targets, and then when we damage any jolted target with melee attacks, we also blind them. Our second aspect is Flow State, whereby defeating a jolted target makes you amplified. When we're amplified, we now get 200% additional recharge rate for our dodge, meaning we can use Lethal Currents even more. We also get more reload speed to make our general gunplay smoother, and we get a whopping 66% damage resist during our dodge animation. So spamming dodge becomes a great way to survive during your super because you can spam dodge infinitely, and is a great way to maneuver around harder content in your super. One of the best weapons to pair with this build is the Pulse Rifle Vantage Point. This Pulse Rifle can roll with jolted feedback, which is far superior to Volt Shot, especially for harder content, because you do not need to kill the enemy to jolt them. You only need to hit the enemy multiple times, which with a Pulse Rifle is pretty easy. The crazy thing is that this Pulse Rifle with jolted feedback is actually available at rank 20 from the free portion of the Season Pass, so it's very easy to get for all players. This is great because when we jolt something stronger like a champion with the Pulse, it will create shocks which will chain to weaker nearby enemies. Because we're hitting multiple enemies at once, we're going to gain super energy so much faster. The Pulse Rifle is also amazing for harder content because it can deal with 2 champion types at once. With Unstoppable Pulse Rifle and Jolt, we can deal with both Unstoppable and Overload champions respectively. And then we also have the artifact perk Trace Evidence. With this, we can generate so many Ionic Traces by hitting enemies affected by Jolt with our Pulse Rifle. Ionic Traces are great because they give us ability energy across all our abilities, meaning we can use our grenade and melee more often. With Spark of Ions, every time we defeat a jolted enemy, we can generate even more of these traces. And then we also use Spark of Shock, which anytime we use our grenade, we can apply Jolt to even more enemies. These Ionic Traces become even more powerful with Curative Orbs. If we use a tonic, every time we gain an Ionic Trace or an Orb of Power, this will also give us a nice bit of healing on top. So if you use this Pulse Rifle and aim for the stronger enemies or champions, you're going to generate your super so quickly because you jolt everything nearby and gain your abilities back because of Ionic Traces. So let's go over the build in a bit more detail. I'm running Arc Staff, Gambler's Dodge, Triple Jump, Disorienting Blow, Arc Bolt Grenade. I love using Arc Bolt over the other grenades because it can apply Jolt to multiple enemies pretty easily. And then our aspects of Flow State and Lethal Current, which I've discussed before. Our fragments include Spark of Feedback, which increases our melee damage by 75% when hit by a melee attack for 5 seconds. We have Spark of Ions, which means anytime we defeat a jolted enemy, we generate even more Ionic Traces. Spark of Shock, which means our Arc Bolt Grenade can apply Jolt on top. And then we have Spark of Resistance, which gives us a further 15% damage reduction when surrounded by multiple enemies. For the weapons I'm using, I've already waxed lyrical about Vantage Point, which is S tier for the build, or actually for any build this season. Other options include the exotic auto rifle Centrifuge, which is going to work well for easier content as that's going to let you blind enemies pretty easily. Or if you really want to lean into the super generation, you could even use something like Bad Juju. For special weapons, I'm using the grenade launcher Lost Signal, which is incredible for both stunning overload champions with our artifact perk and applying the weaken debuff. For heavy, I went with the good old edge transit with bait and switch for DPS, and it applies weaken, but you could even use something like deterministic chaos to deal with barrier champions in the build, especially if you're playing solo. In terms of armor mods, our focus here is to generate lots of orbs of power for super generation and grenade regen. On my helmet, I'm running double harmonic siphon and stasis siphon so we can generate orbs of power from our weapons. If you're using different weapons, you may need to change this around. I then run one heavy-handed and one firepower, so both our grenade and melee can generate orbs of power. On my chest piece, I'm running the relevant resistance mods based on the activity. Then on my boots, I'm running one innovation and one absolution to generate as much grenade energy as possible when I pick up those orbs of power. Then I'm running one recuperation to give a nice health boost every time we pick up an orb of power. If you're running curative orbs with the tonic, then you could run better already instead of recuperation so you can get health regen as well. Then on my cloak, I'm running double bomber for more grenade regen and one reaper so we can generate another orb of power after getting a weapon kill after dodging. In terms of stat distribution, the number one priority here is 100 resilience to maximize damage resistance and survivability in harder content. Then you want a high discipline stat so you can maximize your grenade regeneration. My build isn't great here, but then you probably want intellect to boost passive super regeneration, mobility to boost class ability regeneration, recovery for just general health regen, and then strength last in that order. Artifact mods are important for this build and help take it to the next level. We have Unstoppable Pulse Rifle, Overload Launcher, which are both a must to help deal with champions, Trace Evidence for those ionic traces, the thick of it so we can generate more armor charges, Retinal Burn so we can blind enemies on precision kills when we have those armor charges, Concussive Reload so our grenade launcher weakens enemies, Curative Orbs especially if you're running the tonic, and then Arc Compounding for more damage against blinded enemies. So there you have it, my Raiden Flux Arc Staff build that with Episode 2 Act 2 has become a refreshing way to play GMs. Build your super really quickly by jolting tons of enemies with your weapon and your abilities, and then unleash Arc Staff onto groups of enemies to decimate them, and then rinse and repeat. It's a pretty new loop for GMs instead of just plinking enemies in the back that I'm really enjoying, and I can't wait to try out the other roaming supers next. If you enjoyed what I talked about today, remember to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel for more Destiny build videos, both PvE and PvP. I'm Mr. Ronit, and that's it for today. Peace out, guys.